makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part.
It is day 2 of the Russian-Ukrainian war, at least on my side of the world, and so I'm going to give another update on what appears to be happening, and hopefully frame that into some broader strategic narrative, because there's a lot of information coming out on Twitter, in the media, but it's very, very difficult to see the big picture. So we have to kind of piece together what we see happening here and there, and then tie it up into some bigger narrative. And this is hard because really only the military leaders know what's going on exactly. So I'll give it my best shot, but again, take everything that I say with a pinch of salt, because the situation could be vastly different than what I am perceiving it to be, and things could also change very quickly. So let's start with what is going on kind of strategically. So in my previous video, I mentioned that Ukraine is probably the country in any recent war that has the biggest geographical disadvantage of any defender. That is because Russia can attack it from multiple directions. Ukraine basically has to be alert and successfully defend itself against attacks in all directions, and not just in all directions, but through different forms. That could be amphibious assault, it could be tank spearheads, it could be air assault by helicopter, and it appears that Russia is going to use a combination of all of this. So Ukraine is a big country, very big country, to be honest. And in my previous video, I mentioned that one of its geographical disadvantages is that it's very flat. You can see kind of here that it doesn't really have any big mountain ranges, except in the west. Having said that, it's not entirely an attacker's paradise, because the one thing that it has is that it's very heavily forested, at least in the parts that are closer to Russia. And so forested areas in a relatively well-populated country that has a lot of towns kind of sprinkled around, this means that there are a lot of places where a defender can basically do localized counterattacks and hope to slow down an attacker. It forces the Russians to some extent to rely on the roads, which again are easy targets for ambushes, especially around smaller towns. I still don't know if Russia is going to really try and resort to urban fighting in a city like Kharkov, which is a rather large city, or Kiev or Odessa. So this is a big unknown. They will undoubtedly suffer much more casualties if they attempt urban attacks than if they just try outflanking maneuvers in the open, which again, despite the flatness of Ukraine's territory, are complicated by the fact that it is very, very forested, lots of rivers as well. So you have to rely to some extent on the road network, and especially given that modern armies rely on supply a lot. So what we do know is that there are 4 major areas where Russia is attacking. The first is, I'm going to go clockwise. The first is on the west bank of the Dnieper towards Kiev. These were troops that were stationed in Belarus and have now advanced towards the capital. One of the more amusing bits of news is that they captured Chernobyl, which I hope they were warned where they were going, lest some Russian faces melt in the next couple of days. But Chernobyl has no real strategic objective for Ukraine, so there's no reason why it would fight to defend it. But there are also reports that they are in the outskirts of Kiev, and particularly there is an ongoing battle here for an airfield that is located here in Hostomel. So this airfield right now is the site of a major battle that's going on, an air assault that Russia has launched against it using helicopters. We don't know what the status of that battle is. There are some reports that say there's still fighting going on. There are reports that say that the Russians have captured it. We don't know. Again, very, very conflicting information. There's also reports of fighter jets flying over Kiev. Don't know if those are Russian or Ukrainian. They use the same planes, Sukhoi 27s, for example. So it's hard to tell from the ground what country, what air force they belong to. Well, actually, I'm going to show you this map, which is a bit better, because this one actually shows what is going on, reports of attack, of military operations here and there. So that is the battle for the airport that's going on here. On the eastern flank, it doesn't seem to be going that well for Russia. I've seen some reports of tanks in Kharkov itself. Of course, this does not imply that the city has fallen by any stretch of the imagination. So if the Ukrainian forces are kind of betting on urban fighting there, it's going to be costly, but there has been no breakthrough in the east. And there have been very few reports on the Donbas area, and that's also quite surprising to me. I would have expected much more activity here, but there's very little reports of things going on in that part. Now, where there is a major offensive, Russian offensive going on, and where, from the looks of it, it has been the most successful front for Russia has been in the south. So we have reports that Russian columns advanced from the Crimea and have arrived at cities on the eastern bank of the Dnieper here. So near Kherson and what's it called? Nova Kakhovka. There's been some photos of Russian troops hosting the Russian flag there. And apparently there are also reports of troops advancing towards Melitopol. So the southern front is where Russia appears to be doing best. There have also been conflicting reports about landings in Odessa that apparently have been debunked. I don't think that they have actually happened. Basically, the state of play is that there are 10 big Russian amphibious ships in the Black Sea, which have the ability to land about 1 or 2 battalions of naval infantry. That is not enough to take a city like Odessa, not nearly enough. So I'm not sure. It's a tactical option that they will have, just in case they need some kind of exploit, but I don't think that those amphibious forces are big enough to score a major strategic victory like taking Odessa. So that is kind of the state of play. I think the big takeaway here is that there hasn't been a breakthrough. Russia's super blitzkrieg has been to some extent thwarted. Again, this does not mean that Ukraine is winning by any stretch of the imagination, but I definitely think that Russia will need to step up its game if it hopes to score the decisive victory that it kind of wanted. And remember, the more time passes, the more this becomes a benefit to the Ukrainians, for 2 reasons. The first reason is the more time passes, the more the risk that Russia will fuck up in some way. So the initial operations will tend to go according to plan, but it's everything that happens in the immediate aftermath that raises the level of uncertainty. And a good defender will know that the best way to win a war against overwhelming odds is to prey on your enemy's uncertainty. So if as time goes by, things don't go according to plan, Russia messes up. If Russia can capitalize on those mistakes, then it has some hope of perhaps not winning the war outright, if by winning you mean the defeat of the Russian military on the battlefield, but win in the sense that it will achieve a ceasefire that is most advantageous to it. That is, I think, the objective, the broader grand strategic objective of the Ukrainian government, not a military victory against Russia, which in de facto terms would be a victory. I mean, this war is Russia's to lose, and if they do lose or if they don't achieve the objectives that they want, it's going to be a bit humiliating for them. And let's be honest, this is the biggest country that any power has attempted to subdue since World War II. Ukraine is twice as big as Vietnam. It is about 50% bigger than Iraq. It is more populated than Iraq as well. So this is being undertaken by a country that is a shadow of what it was in terms of relative to its superpower days. This is not the Soviet army. Now, the Russian army over the last decade has modernized very significantly. They've become a smaller, more professional force, but still, this could still be well beyond the bounds of what they are capable of. And there's an old adage in war that you basically need a 3-to-1 ratio of power over your rival to even begin to think of a victory. To even begin to think of a victory. And you need a 6-to-1 ratio to practically guarantee it. So I'm not sure that Russia has that 3-to-1 advantage over Ukraine. So it will all depend on what happens on individual areas of the battlefield. This idea that there is a front is probably a bit of a misnomer in modern warfare. Really, you don't have like the two sides facing off each other like you had in the Western Front in World War I or the Eastern Front in World War II. Modern warfare is much more fluid. It's about individual units advancing here, retreating there. Often you don't have a good idea of what's going on, so it's kind of hard to draw a front line here. So a lot will depend on how well Ukraine manages to kind of hit the Russians piecemeal, tactically retreat where it can to better defensive positions, and just chip away at Russia's military advantages bit by bit. Now, the supply issue is worrying for Russia. It's worrying for Ukraine as well, but it's much more worrying for Russia because at this intensity, we're talking about 200,000 troops practically. Engaging, fighting a modern war at this intensity, 200,000 troops, requires an expenditure of weaponry that, you feel it after a few days. Logistics is the biggest enemy of most armies, and there is really only one army that can sustain a high-tech war for any decent amount of time. That is the US. But countries like Russia, you're gonna run out of those cruise missiles pretty quickly. You're gonna run out of those Iskander ballistic missiles, the hypersonic missiles that are launched from MiG-31s. They don't have that many. That's a problem. Russia has a level of absolute military spending that is lower than many NATO countries. So and yet it has an army that is much bigger than any NATO country except the US. So something has to give. That money obviously doesn't require, the Russian army doesn't have like the overhead costs of a Western army, but something has to give. And one of the reasons that they can afford to have such a big army and be lavishly equipped with tanks and other weapons is that the logistical side is not that well taken care of. So they might have very flashy missiles, some of them as advanced, if not more, than the West does, but they don't have enough of them. And if they feel pressure to achieve a breakthrough, if they get thwarted for another couple of days, then they're going to be tempted to spend more of it. And if they still don't achieve their breakthrough, then they're going to be forced to fight a war primarily with less sophisticated weapons, dumb weaponry. And that is when the Ukrainian military can really, really punish the Russians. So really, it's these first days. I mean, this war will be decided really in the first week. You heard it here first. So we'll see what goes on. We'll see what goes on. Now, let's go to Twitter. Let's look at some of the videos because it's very impressive stuff. Here's a Russian POW being treated by a Ukrainian soldier. I hope both sides treat their POWs well, as in accordance to international law. At least the Ukrainians appear to be doing it. This is impressive video of, I think I showed one last night, of a rocket barrage. Rockets are a very impressive weapon. And here's another video. This one is even more impressive, because this one's from close range. So an attack like that looks incredibly frightening, and if you're on the receiving end, it's probably the worst thing that you can experience as an infantryman. Probably second only to being carpet bombed by aircraft. But the fact of the matter is that rocket attacks are very imprecise, and if you are well dug in, if you're well fortified, you should be okay, as frightening as it was. And the Russians are big fans of using artillery, rocket artillery. In fact, they were big users of rocket artillery during World War II, and they continue to be so during the Cold War. NATO really took a while before they realized the usefulness of rockets until the late 70s and 80s. But Soviet doctrine at the time was basically to use rocket attacks against retreating forces, because retreating forces don't have the time to dig in. So that's when they're most vulnerable, especially in open areas. Being caught in a rocket attack like that, you are fucked. I mean, a single rocket launcher vehicle can wipe out an entire square kilometer in one barrage. So that's just the extent to which these weapons can really devastate a battlefield. But again, these are not precision weapons. You know, they're not useful against things like tanks as well. And if you are well dug in and well fortified, you can withstand an attack from rockets. So very impressive to watch, but questionable military effectiveness. We'll have to see. So reports of some airplanes being downed. Yeah, there's a lot of videos of destroyed aircraft, destroyed tanks from both sides. It's really just hard to ascertain which side which side has the edge. This is pretty much a modern mechanized army's biggest nightmare. Infantrymen armed with rockets and missiles, because these are good for ambushes. Yeah, that is, I think, the best hope that Ukraine has of blunting any armored spearhead, and especially in cities. You know, these kind of troops are absolutely devastating, as the U.S. discovered during the Iraqi insurgency. You know, urban fighting is incredibly difficult for the attacker, incredibly difficult. The downside is, of course, if the Russians do attempt major urban warfare, there's going to be a lot of civilian casualties, civilian casualties. But it would definitely be to Ukraine's advantage if Russia decides to waste a lot of its weaponry on urban combat. Yeah. So, like I said, there's tons of information on Twitter coming out, but it's very hard to form a narrative. You know. So again, this is maps of the southern advance up to Melitopol. Again, we don't know if Melitopol has fallen. We don't know if, you know, just a vanguard, you know, some kind of like force recon troop has entered the city. We don't know. We'll have to see. There were some accounts yesterday of a city that fell to Russian troops, then that it was recaptured by Ukrainian ones. So we won't know. We won't know. I do think it does seem, like I said earlier, that the Russian front seems to be the more successful one for Russia right now. And oh, this is the video from Chernobyl. There's a tank. There's an APC. Yeah. Yeah. What else? I think those are the more. Oh, there's so again the battle for Hostomel. We don't know if it's ongoing or not. Here's one video, one guy claiming a couple of hours ago that there's still fighting going on. There was another tweet from 6 hours ago that it had fallen. Who knows? I don't think it's gonna. Even if the airfield falls, I don't think that's a huge strategic defeat for the Ukrainians. That airfield is already so close to the front that it's for all intents and purposes, useless. Like, you can't operate an airfield that's within range of enemy artillery. So even if the Russians hadn't taken it, it's of zero value. So, yeah. And now let's do what I'm also going to do in each of these segments, recap the uh, the dumber voices of Putin apologists on the left, which are becoming an embarrassment to our movement. And here is one that I unfortunately had a lot of respect, and who I think is a very intelligent man, but war makes idiots out of many of us. Stop Putin's invasion, prevent any NATO escalation. Now, this would have been, I guess, okay like 4 or 5 days ago, but he tweeted it after the war had already begun. So it was a tweet that already aged poorly the moment that he clicked send. This is just stop this. Just stop this. Stop with the worst type of Russian apologism right now is this whole Russia bad, but, and then I go on a litany of perceived excuses of NATO aggression. Just stop with this, okay? What has happened in the last couple of days basically proves and justifies NATO's existence. Everything that has happened in these last couple of days justifies NATO's existence and justifies every reason why Russia's neighbors would rather be in NATO. Okay, full stop, period. You lost this argument, people. I have said on numerous occasions that, yeah, NATO was probably obsolete after the Cold War. But guess what? With fucking Vladimir Putin in power, it's no longer obsolete. And I think he's proven it. So just stop with this whole, it's NATO's fault. It's 30 years of bad. Just stop. Okay? You're wrong. You're wrong. And you're on the wrong fucking side of history. Here is the Stop the War Coalition, which, if you recall, was one of the big movements against the Iraq War in Britain. Look at how they're framing it. We oppose the British establishment's addiction to war and its squandering of public resources on militarism. And they're gonna march, of course. What fucking cowards. What fucking... And I hate it because Jeremy Corbyn is really close to this movement. I think he was the leader at some point. They're full of shit now with Russia. I'm sorry. And I'll include Jeremy Corbyn and any other Labour leftist who falls into this Putin apologism. Let's look at their statement. Stop the War condemns the movement of Russian forces into Ukraine and urges that they immediately withdraw. We call for an immediate ceasefire, yada, 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 should be resolved peacefully, yada, yada, yada. And here's the but. This conflict is the product of 30 years of failed policies, including the expansion of NATO and US hegemony at the expense of other countries and major war same lines, same. This is seriously what I fucking hate about the anti-war left. It's like they recycle the same lines. They think it applies to every context, just yada yada. US imperialism, British imperialism, NATO this, NATO that. Jesus Christ, this is a war that has been started by Russia, solely by Russia, by a fucking authoritarian despot who is currently arresting hundreds of people doing the same shit that you are doing, protesting against the war. And he's arresting them. There are currently massive protests in St. Petersburg and in Moscow. Did I show the videos? I don't think I did. But yeah, there are currently massive protests, and you can see the police going in and arresting them en masse. Hundreds of people have been arrested. They are protesting a war, for the right reasons, not like these dipshits. Yeah, just stop this. Just stop this. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. This is my biggest fear, is that this is just a massive PR disaster in the making for the left. We have been on the right side of history for the last 20, 30 years on everything. We were right about economics. We were right about inequality. We were right about climate change. We were right about the Iraq War and how it would destabilize the Middle East. We were absolutely right about everything. And now this bunch of dipshits, which do not understand that imperialism is imperialism, regardless of who fucking does it. These dipshits are going to destroy that because all they're doing is playing into this idea that liberal centrists, war hawks, and neocons have that the left is too immature, too stupid to discuss foreign affairs, that they're the only ones that are smart enough to do that. That and their buddies, military industrial complex ghouls working for the Atlantic Council and God knows what other fucking think tank. Those are the only people qualified to talk about foreign affairs. You leftists are just too immature to do it. And you know what? When you look at shit like this, they're right. They're absolutely fucking right. Because these people have a child's brain and a child's ability to reason. Complete lack of principle on anything that is related to anti-war and anti-imperialism. Because the idea of a principle is that you apply it to everyone, not just the side that you hate. So it is incredibly, incredibly disappointing to see this. Disappointing on any labor members who sign up to this statement. You're on the wrong side of history, guys. You're on the wrong side of history. And it will take years to shake off this PR disaster. All the fucking leftists. And I don't mean the tankies, because they have no shame. At least they have no shame to be that hypocritical and be obvious in their grift. But it's the smart people, like Yanis Varoufakis, and many, many others, who are falling into this fucking rabbit hole of Russian apologism and false dichotomy of, well, both sides are bad. No, I'm sorry, they're not. And having said that, yeah, hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please please share. Most importantly, please subscribe. And I will try and do daily updates, maybe even more than one. One in the morning, one in the late at night, to kind of, like I said, piece together the puzzle of what's going on, because it's really hard to tell. So yeah, hope you enjoyed it and take care.